This is part of a series of videos to introduce people to very low budget, accessible recipes using some of the most commonly wasted foods in Europe. We're lucky enough to be here at the Skip Garden Kitchen, a London-based charity which aims to give young people cooking and growing skills and teaches them about sustainability. Today we're going to make papa al pomodoro, which is a Tuscan bread and tomato soup, and we'll be using tomatoes and old bread. And this is a great way to use up bread if it's gone a little bit past its best. But before we do that, we're going to run off to Borough Market to get some delicious ingredients. There's a splendid array of tomatoes. The recipe's particularly good for tomatoes that aren't in this perfect condition. They've got a little bit old, but maybe looking a bit squishy, might have got a bit damaged. At that point, they're perfect for cooking. A good way to reduce your food waste is to work out how much fruit and vegetables you actually need. If you can find out how many portions that you eat a week, you can buy the right amount and add it to your shopping list. For this dish, we're going to be using some fresh tomatoes and tinned tomatoes. This one's beginning to go a little bit squidgy, so it's at the absolute perfect state to be cooked. We need about 200 grams of fresh tomatoes, and that's about this much, roughly. These things aren't set in stone. I don't think any Italian grandmothers in the hills weighed and measured every tomato when they were making things like this. So it's approximately 2 medium-sized tomatoes, and I am going to cut them into smallish cubes that are just over 1 centimetre squared. Because if these pieces are too big, we're going to have massive pieces of skin in our soup, and that probably won't be so nice to eat. And it's a good way to use up tomatoes when they're just about to become overripe, go mouldy. For this recipe, we're going to need 2 or 3 cloves of garlic. If your garlic's getting a little old and it's beginning to sprout, you can keep it a bit longer by chopping it up, putting it in a food processor with a big glug of oil, preferably olive oil. So hopefully your pan's decently warm. Add a really, really good slug of olive oil. There's so few ingredients in this dish that this one's a pretty important one. It'll make it taste delicious. I'm going to put the tomatoes in carefully. And we're going to cook them off in this oil until they start to soften, and you'll know they're getting soft because the skin will come away from the edges. So the tomatoes have started to soften, and we can see that the skin's beginning to come off them. That's a good time to add the garlic. Now that the fresh tomatoes are softened and the garlic has cooked off a little bit, I'm going to add a tin of chopped tomatoes. You could use your plum tomatoes, but then you'd have to chop them yourself. They're going to go into the pan along with the same amount of water. We've turned the heat right down so that it doesn't splash everywhere. And now that I've got the tomatoes in, I want to add the same amount again of water. And this is a good way to get every last bit of the tomatoes out of the can. That's ready to pop in the recycling. So we're going to add about 12 torn up basil leaves to this. Those will just get torn very roughly into the soup, and then we'll simmer it for another 10 or 15 minutes. So while this is simmering away and it smells delicious, we're going to go back to Borough Market and have a nice chat with the bakers at Bread Ahead, who kindly gave us the bread for this recipe. It smells amazing in here. It's such a nice place to work, I bet. But I came here and I asked if they had any day-old bread, because that would be perfect for our recipe. And this is amazing. It smells great. So I was talking to you earlier and you said that you really have very minimal waste here. Everything you do have, do you give away?
We actually make bread pudding, so we don't be wasting our bread. And then and at the end of the day, we have products like cheese and olive sticks. You can't stick those in a bread pudding. So what we do, there is a charity in Borough Market, and they come and they collect all our products that we cannot use, and they're given to charity, which makes everyone really happy.
Yeah, that's amazing. No, exactly, absolutely. I've been keeping this bread in cling film. It will last a little bit longer. It will lose its crustiness, but it will stop it from going far too hard, which can sometimes happen with a nice loaf of bread if you leave it. So we need about 4 good slices of bread. I love the end bits. I think it's an absolute scandal how much of it gets wasted by factories when they make sandwiches. The end is definitely going in. If you're preparing this in advance, don't add the bread now, because if you leave it and reheat it, it will turn into a tomatoey porridge, and that will be fairly disgusting. So keep the bread on the side if you're planning on eating it later. Very gentle turn. I've got all the bread coated. Now I'm going to pop it in a bowl and dress it with a little olive oil. So here's our soup. It's very thick and very hearty, and still thankfully very hot. I'm going to avoid the temptation to try and pour it straight from the pan into the bowl, because I'm not wearing an apron, and inevitably it will splash everywhere and I'll be covered in tomato. So here we go, Papa al Pomodoro. A little bit of olive oil to give it that Italian feeling. We're ready to go. So I'm going to try this now, and I'm going to try not to scald my mouth. It's good. Oh, that bread is marvellous. I'm glad we picked that up. It's great, it's delicious. You can feel good about doing something for the planet. Everyone's happy. To find out more about how food waste is caused, check out the EFFECTeu website. And for more in this series of videos, keep your eyes peeled, and you can follow the initiative on Facebook and Twitter.